Hi, I'm Tristan. I'm 13 years old. I'm curious, I'm passionate, and I'm sure you are too. Join me on a quest to dig deep and find out new things. Welcome to Youth Voices. Good evening. Welcome to my program. This is your host Tristan Pang on Planet FM 104.6. Youth Voices. Good to have your company on a Saturday evening. In today's show, we will chat with an insightful and successful engineer, Cass Kenworthy. Let's talk. 24 years old Cass Kenworthy is a transportation engineer at a consultant company. Cass was born and raised in Castor Bay on the north shore of Auckland, and she went to Westlake Girls High School before moving to King's College for year 12 and 13 to complete Cambridge examinations and to board. Cass likes sports. She played soccer, basketball, netball and athletics, primarily hurdling and 100-meter sprints, when she was at school. She completed first year of uni biomedical science, then realised she didn't want to do laboratory work, so she switched to engineering, never intending to practice as an engineer. She never took physics past year 11, so she had no intention of taking engineer. She worked at a fishing shop all through uni, as well as part-time for 1 year at Watercare, and 1.5 years at Auckland Transport. When she is not working, she spends a lot of time in the Coromandel water skiing and fishing. Cass said if she wasn't an engineer, she would like to spend her time cooking. Food is her life, and she absolutely loves cooking and eating good food. I'm very lucky to have Cass on my show today. Hi Cass, welcome to my show.
Hi Tristan, thank you for having me.
So you're a transportation engineer at a consultant company. And when I go to your office, I can see most of the engineers are male. And I know that there are not many female engineers, and there are even less females in transportation. But you are in these two together. More interestingly was you studied at King's College, traditionally a boys' school. And it seems that you're always in a male-dominated environment. So how do you feel about it? And do you enjoy studying and working with so many men? And is there any difference between a man and a woman as an engineer?
Well, to start, I didn't even realise that I had been in such a male-dominated environment through school and through study. It doesn't really affect me. So it's just really by chance, by coincidence. I enjoy it. I think that it's nice that there are more females coming through, that we are starting to get more women in our office, which is nice socially. But in terms of work, it doesn't make too much difference whether I'm working with males or females.
That's interesting. So how about the difference between men and women as an engineer? Is there much difference?
Not that I had noticed so far. There are a lot less women that I've been able to observe, so I suppose that I can't really make a big judgment call on that. But I think that some people do say that women can be more detail-orientated, and which can be really good in the engineering field.
That's interesting. So now, can you tell us one of the most interesting projects you have come across or you've heard of?
Oh, there's such a number of interesting projects that we get to work on. One thing I've enjoyed working on is the ports of Auckland, which is I think it's especially interesting because it's very controversial and there's a lot of politics around it. But I've been looking at assessing the transport and the rail and the trucks and the number of containers that are coming in, and also the forecast increase in number of containers, and looking at the impact that has on the network. It's really interesting looking at what's directly in your backyard.
That's awesome. So you did very well at all your exams, and you even got some perfect scores in the Cambridge exams. So can you please tell us how did you study and how did you prepare for the exams?
Oh, I was definitely a last-minute studier. Most of my study was done on the day before an exam. I had beautiful notes. I handwrote. I tried to fit my entire coursework on an A4 piece of paper. So it was a process of condensing and summarising and only putting the really important parts there. And most of that happened the night before, plus doing lots of past exam papers, which is usually the best way to study.
That's cool. So what do you aim to achieve with your job?
It's a big question. I don't really know yet. I want to keep going in the transportation field. I really like the big projects. So if I can get involved in some more of those over the next couple of years, that'd be really cool. Maybe a bit of travel would be good. Going and experiencing some overseas examples of transport, such as underground stations that they have in the UK, would be really fascinating and I think really worthwhile.
That's cool. So now I have 2 signature questions. So the first question is, can you tell us 3 people who have influenced you, so our young listeners can learn from them and why?
3 people that have influenced me. I suppose I've just been influenced from people that I work with. A lot of them are from the UK, and so I suppose they have a very different outlook on transport and on the way we do things in New Zealand. And I suppose they're a lot more realistic, and they've come from backgrounds where they're a lot more willing to take bold choices, and it's how do we incorporate that into what we do. And they're also a lot more sustainable. They do things like composting, and they're not so wasteful with plastics that we are here in New Zealand. For a clean green nation, we're particularly we don't pay much regard to our use of products and our wastage.
Okay, so now my second signature question is, can you share with us something that you've heard or read that really inspired you?
I watched a good TED talk recently with regards to waste and sustainability, and it was looking at how much food we waste, and it really inspired me to be more careful about what I buy and what I consume, and not throw out things like the crusts of bread. It's very wasteful. I can reuse that. I can make breadcrumbs out of it. So I think that's that was really fascinating to me.
So you're very keen on the environmental side of things, right?
I'm not necessarily keen on the environmental side of things. I suppose I've just had my eyes opened up recently as to kind of how not so much how our behaviour is hurting the environment, but just in terms of how our behaviour can be changed. I mean, some of these things seem so simple, and we kind of just don't think about it because we form this habit. And then you actually stop and think about how many paper towels you are using to dry your hands. You kind of just realise, actually, I don't need to use 5. I only need to use 1 if I shake my hands a little bit before I dry them. But it's because we've formed these habits, we just don't think about it. So it's being reminded of that I quite like.
So thank you, Cass, for coming onto my show today.
No worries. It's been lovely to be here.
We thank you, Cass, for coming onto my show today. From her, we learned that we have to follow our passions and to chase our dreams. Cass has never limited herself in studying and working in the male environment. When she was in the university, she had the courage to change faculty when she found out that she would enjoy more in others. She also knows how to relax herself to do something that she likes after work. We have to love ourselves, like Cass does, to enjoy both our work or study and our pastime. We would then live happier and healthier. Let's be inspired. Now let's listen to the inspirational and motivational TED Talk Cass mentioned by Tristan Stewart.
The job of uncovering the global food waste scandal started for me when I was 15 years old. I bought some pigs, I was living in Sussex, and I started to feed them in the most traditional and environmentally friendly way. I went to my school kitchen and I said, give me the scraps that my school friends have turned their noses up at. I went to the local baker and took their stale bread. I went to the local greengrocer and I went to a farmer who was throwing away potatoes because they were the wrong shape or size for supermarkets. This was great. My pigs turned that food waste into delicious pork. I sold that pork to my school friends' parents and I made a good pocket money addition to my teenage allowance. But I noticed that most of the food that I was giving my pigs was in fact fit for human consumption, and that I was only scratching the surface, and that right the way up the food supply chain, in supermarkets, greengrocers, bakers, in our homes, in factories, on farms, we were hemorrhaging out food. Supermarkets didn't even want to talk to me about how much food they were wasting. I'd been round the back, I'd seen bins full of food being locked and then trucked off to landfill sites, and I thought, surely there is something more sensible to do with food than waste it. One morning, when I was feeding my pigs, I noticed a particularly tasty-looking sun-dried tomato loaf that used to crop up from time to time. I grabbed hold of it, sat down, and ate my breakfast with my pigs. That was the first act of what I later learned to call freeganism, really an exhibition of the injustice of food waste and the provision of the solution to food waste, which is simply to sit down and eat food rather than throwing it away. That became, as it were, a way of confronting large businesses in the business of wasting food and exposing, most importantly, to the public that when we're talking about food being thrown away, we're not talking about rotten stuff. We're not talking about stuff that's beyond the pale. We're talking about good, fresh food that is being wasted on a colossal scale. Eventually, I set about writing my book, really to demonstrate the extent of this problem on a global scale. What this shows is a nation-by-nation breakdown of the likely level of food waste in each country in the world. Unfortunately, empirical data, good, hard stats, don't exist. And therefore, to prove my point, I first of all had to find some proxy way of uncovering how much food was being wasted. So I took the food supply of every single country, and I compared it to what was actually likely to be being consumed in each country. That's based on diet intake surveys, it's based on levels of obesity, it's based on a range of factors that gives you an approximate guess as to how much food is actually going into people's mouths. That black line in the middle of that table is the likely level of consumption with an allowance for certain levels of inevitable waste. There will always be waste. I'm not that unrealistic that I think we can live in a waste-free world. But that black line shows what a food supply should be in a country if they allow for a good, stable, secure, nutritional diet for every person in that country. Any dot above that line, and you'll quickly notice that that includes most countries in the world, represents unnecessary surplus and is likely to reflect levels of waste in each country. As a country gets richer, it invests more and more in getting more and more surplus into its shops and restaurants. And as you can see, most European and North American countries fall between 150 and 200% of the nutritional requirements of their population. So a country like America has twice as much food on its shop shelves and in its restaurants than is actually required to feed the American people. But the thing that really struck me when I plotted all this data, and it was a lot of numbers, was that you can see how it levels off. Countries rapidly shoot towards that 150 mark, and then they level off. And they don't really go on rising as you might expect. So I decided to unpack that data a little bit further to see if that was true or false. And that's what I came up with. If you include not just the food that ends up in shops and restaurants, but also the food that people feed to livestock, the maize, the soy, the wheat, that humans could eat, but choose to fatten livestock instead to produce increasing amounts of meat and dairy products, what you find is that most rich countries have between 3 and 4 times the amount of food that their population needs to feed itself. A country like America has 4 times the amount of food that it needs. When people talk about the need to increase global food production, to feed those 9 billion people that are expected on the planet by 2050, I always think of these graphs. The fact is we have an enormous buffer in rich countries between ourselves and hunger. We've never had such gargantuan surpluses before. In many ways, this is a great success story of human civilization, of the agricultural surpluses that we set out to achieve 12,000 years ago. It is a success story. It has been a success story, but what we have to recognize now is that we are reaching the ecological limits that our planet can bear. And when we chop down forests, as we are every day, to grow more and more food, when we extract water from depleting water reserves, when we emit fossil fuel emissions in the quest to grow more and more food, and then we will throw away so much of it, we have to think about what we can start saving.
We thank you, Cass, for the interview on my show today. If you want to listen to my other shows, please go to my website, www.questisfun.org.nz/youthvoices. That is www.quest-is-fun.org.nz/youthvoices. So for today, that's it from me, Tristan Pang. Thank you for listening. I welcome your feedback and your support of the program. Please write to me on Facebook or email me to youthvoicesnz@gmail.com. Good night, world. Join me again next Saturday at 5:20 p.m. to dig deeper, or listen anytime online at planetaudio.org.nz/youthvoices. Youth Voices.